Hey everyone, I just wanted to make a quick video going over the handguard kit that I made for the Carmel that brings it closer to its original concept over what was delivered to the US customer. The community calls this the Israeli version, and I took on this project when no other party really wanted to design or produce it, but I wanted one, so I sat down in SolidWorks, and over the course of 4 months I got it to a point where I'm happy with it. There are some things that I need to point out and some lessons learned, so we'll be diving into all of that now. I did not see a video on YouTube explaining how to remove the barrel, so I'm just going to put that little tidbit in here for you guys. Obviously, you're going to start by pushing out the pin on the lower receiver. That will allow you to drop it down and pull it out. And then you'll see that there are 3 screws that hold both the original handguard and my adaptation to the rifle. I want to point out that straight from the factory, mine had some kind of Loctite on them, and I stripped 2 out of the 3 trying to remove them, and I had to drill them out. It was a whole process. So please be aware of that. Be careful when removing them. Make sure you're using the appropriate sized Allen key or whatever size it's supposed to be, and then if you have to do any kind of other tricks to loosen up the Loctite, just be aware that might be in your future. However, if you do mess it up like I have, you can get the replacement screw kit straight from the IWI store online. Now, the barrel is held in place by 2 hex bolts. The one closer to the end of the muzzle being exposed, the other one being semi-concealed behind these 2 wings as part of the upper receiver, some little plastic parts that are kind of there. The rear bolt only needs to be loosened, so you can loosen it, and then the one closer to the end of the muzzle needs to be actually removed completely. It's a hex bolt that goes into a cylinder that is on the other side. Both pieces need to be removed in order to actually remove the barrel from the upper receiver. So as you can see, my barrel is cut down. It's cut to the 12.5-inch mark. There were some issues trying to find a gunsmith who was able to cut this. We sent it to Silencer Central, and they advised that because of the gas system, it would be unsafe to put it in their lathe, or their lathe wasn't big enough. It was like one of those things. So ultimately we went with Long Rifles Inc., because they use a 5-axis mill instead of a lathe, and they were able to perform it for us. So that is how we got that done. We asked for the exact same pitch, threading, and length of the threads. If you notice, if you take off your muzzle device on the Carmel, it's a little bit longer than most threading is, but we just asked for it to just be a complete copy of whatever was on there, pumped back to the 12.5-inch mark. And then we did not send it with the piston or the spring. We just kind of took all that out, took out the gas regulator knob, and just kind of sent it bare bones. In addition to extending the length of the gas regulator so that it would protrude out the front of the handguard, we had to adjust the diameter of the gas ports themselves. Initially, we had not made any changes to the 2 sizes, so there's a smaller one for suppressed, there's a bigger one for unsuppressed. We ran it on the bigger setting, and we were not getting any kind of movement in the bolt upon firing. So we bumped it up to 3/32 of an inch. That was enough to get the bolt about 90% of the way where we were getting reliable extractions, but it wasn't going all the way to start feeding those next rounds. So we went just a hair larger than 332, and that was able to fix it. And that now we're getting the full extracting and feeding. So moving on to the handguard. I actually purchased one before I even bought my Carmel, because I was really just trying to see about the feasibility of this, because I wasn't going to buy a Carmel unless I could get the original handguard on it. Using a 3D scanning service, I was able to get the original handguard scanned and modeled in SolidWorks, so I could begin building off of that without changing any of the original underlying connection points. This was pretty easy to just kind of chop up the front, design it the correct way, and then just getting some 3D printed prototypes just out of plastic to start measuring stuff out. And for those of you with autism wondering why this is not a perfect recreation of the real Israeli handguard, that is because the US version is fundamentally different than the version you see in the promotional videos and photos. It's actually a few Picatinny rails longer on the receiver, and there's nothing I can do to fix that. So that is why some stuff had to get shifted, and the angle on that forward slant on the handguard had to be kept, but in order to keep that, you had to extend everything a ½ inch, and that's the reason that it looks the way it does. So here you can see in the middle the 3D printed PLA prototype, and then above that we have a version printed out of fiberglass infused nylon, which was ideally the best material to do this with for the main body and for the rail covers that were supposed to just slide on and off. Originally I was just going to call it there and have the main body with the 3 rail covers be the final product. Unfortunately, I could not accept that the sling retention loop was made out of this fiberglass nylon, which I knew would not hold under serious stress and would just easily snap off, which made me go back and redesign it with the true aluminum clip thing in the front, and then have those sling retention loops be printed out of steel, and that would satisfy, it eventually returned to the original version that IWI had designed. There were 2 versions of the front clip that I designed. The first one being entirely 3D printed aluminum with the clips part of the structure. The aluminum was just thin enough that it could have a little bit of bend without breaking, but in the long run I didn't think this was going to be acceptable or hold up under repeated removal. Not that people would be removing this, but even just the going about 3D manufacturing this, I'm sure a lot of companies would have issues with that small of a tolerance, and I'm sure people that went to go order this would find that they got a bunch that were broken. So that led us to go to a secondary design where the clips were a second piece of the fiberglass infused nylon that would just be JB welded on to the inside of that clip, and the nylon has enough of give that you can move it without breaking it, and it would give you that strong kind of retention that you need. Now, because of manufacturing defects or other imperfections, the sling mounts were not always a perfect fit when I was putting them into the front clip piece. So I did have a Dremel to just kind of shave down a few hairs on all 4 sides until it was a decent fit. And then from there, I just JB welded that into the front clip. And of course, I painted the front clip first because I wanted to keep the kind of raw steel finish on the sling mounts as they kind of appear on the Israeli version. As we get into the end here with the rail covers, I just want to give a general disclaimer that these were very difficult to design in a way that they would actually function correctly. So for those of you that don't even want to deal with this, you can just order the main body, the front aluminum clip, the 2 steel sling attachment mounts, and then the 2 clips to hold it against the main body out of the fiberglass nylon, and you can call it a day. And I'll show you the prices at the end here with the Craft Cloud estimates. But if you do want to continue on and get the actual rail covers for this. Just keep in mind, it's not perfect. I don't exactly know what I'm doing here, but I got it to a point where I'm okay with it because it's, you know, repeatable and strong and safe. So let me go into that right now. So what ultimately ended up working as the final product was a rail cover that was printed out of nylon PA11. There was a hole for the actual lever to disengage the rail cover. That actual lever was 3D printed out of steel. It was very similar to the weight of aluminum, but I just wanted something a little bit stronger and it didn't add too much weight. And then on top of that, I had these very thin aluminum sheets that were 0.015 inches thick, laser cut to a particular design that would allow retention of the lever in its seat in the rail cover, but also there was a little lip on the back half of it that would apply that tension to kind of keep it flat when you needed the rail cover to be flat, and it would give you resistance when you attempted to push the rear of the lever to disengage the lock to remove the rail cover. So that covers every part that you would need if you wanted to do an exact replication of what I've done here. You need the main body, you need a front clip, 2 sling retention mounts, the clips to lock it into the main body. There are 3 rail covers, left, right, bottom. There are 3 levers that are exactly the same for each of those 3 rail covers, and then there's a very thin laser cut sheet of aluminum to help retain those. You'll need some kind of epoxy, JB weld, or if you want to do some real welding to weld the steel slings onto the aluminum clip, you can do that as well, but I think JB weld is the easiest thing to go around, and obviously the strength is comparable here. So yeah, that is basically it. So I'm going to go into how to actually now buy this using the third-party services. Obviously, I do not want to get into any legal trouble with IWI, so obviously this is all going to be free for release. You can find the files that you need on the GrabCAD library, and you can also find them on our website. It'll be $0, that's how you know you're buying the correct one. It is free. It includes the STLs for all of the parts that we just went over, and I will then now show you how to get those parts manufactured. As a side note, if anybody does want the step files or the actual SolidWorks files to do your own thing, all of the versions and all of the earlier prototypes have all been included in one giant zip file, and you can actually purchase that if you want to from our website for $9. So you don't have to use CraftCloud. It's just one of those services that I found is super convenient and doesn't give me a hard time, and the quotes are instant, and I'm not shilling for them at all. Just, you know, it's just what I happen to use. So if you want to use them, I'll just show you how to go through that process. There's a upload button in the top right. You don't have to create an account if you want to get the quotes, but it's easy to create an account if you're going to have multiple orders, so you can just track all your orders. But you'll go to the upload model at the top right. You will then upload the .stl for each particular part that you're trying to work on. So for this example, I'm just going to show you the main body of the handguard, which is called rear handguard. Once it's uploaded, you can click the little icon on the left to see the 3D preview of the model you just uploaded, and you can just kind of, you know, play around with it if you don't have your own 3D object viewer program. You're free to get things printed out of any material you want. For the main handguard body, I just happen to do a fiberglass infused nylon, so I'm going to sort by nylons and then choose the option fiberglass nylon. And now comes the part you got to really pay attention to, which is the production location. There are things like ITAR, they do apply here. So for obvious firearm parts, like the main handguard body that has, you know, Picatinny rails on the sides and the bottom, it's pretty obvious that this is for a rifle. So you need to uncheck all your production locations to set it to, if you live in North America, change it to North America so you're not violating ITAR. And you'll see that there is a company in Texas called Panashape. They are the same company that made the one that you saw in this video. So I recommend them. Just be aware that it will go up in price because you're getting it produced in the US. It's obviously cheaper in China, but China will refuse to make your product if they catch wind that it's a firearm part, and they're pretty good about that. So don't think you can get away with like getting super safeties or other nonsense 3D printed, because they are well aware of all the common stuff that people try and get 3D printed overseas. That being said, the sling mounts, the clips to put onto the front aluminum clip, the rail covers, the laser cut aluminum plates, the rail levers for the rail covers, none of those look like firearm parts, so you can get away with getting those ordered overseas and no one's going to know the wiser. The only parts that are really going to raise a red flag are the main body, and unfortunately the front clip as well might get flagged, so you might play the game there on trying to get that made. And I will say, all of these parts were sent over to Sven from Manticore Arms, so he will be trying to look into maybe making some of these smaller parts himself, so that people don't have to order online. But at the time of making this video, there's nothing really there yet, but maybe in the future they'll become available as we kind of get this rolling. So once you have all your parts for assembly, again, all you really need is JB Weld or some kind of epoxy or whatever glue you're trying to use here. For the front clip part, you will apply a very thin layer of your JB Weld to the correct side of the fiberglass clips. Once they've got a nice little thin coat on them, you're just going to snap them on to those 3 cylinder posts on the inside of that front aluminum clip. It may not be a perfect fit. That's okay. The nylon will give way, and it'll get cut up by the aluminum, especially if your aluminum cylinders have like little imperfections in them. It's not a perfect cylinder. You don't have to grind it out with a Dremel. Just push pretty firmly, evenly across the fiberglass clip, and it will go on. And then obviously the JB Weld will cure in about 4 to 6 hours, and then that'll be a strong connection. And then at that point, you can then paint it. And then after you're done painting it, you can then get your sling mounts inserted. If they don't fit right away, just Dremel them down until they do. And then just JB Weld those as well and let that dry, and then that will complete the front clip. The rail covers are also, again, a little minor assembly. You'll slot the lever into the groove, and then with your aluminum sheet, you'll line up the sheet so that it's obviously covering the axle of the levers, and then you have to kind of play with where you want the middle section to rest on the lever. In this photo, you see it's about halfway. I would actually bring it a lot more rearward, so that only about maybe a 1/4 inch is hitting the rail lever. The aluminum's pretty stiff, so you don't need to have it halfway. It's going to be a lot more difficult for you to disengage the lock if you have it that far. So I found that maybe like a 1/4 inch is a good amount to have it resting over the rail lever. And again, just be aware that there are manufacturing defects. So if the part that actually locks onto the Picatinny rail, if it's not hitting perfectly, you may have to grind it down slightly with a Dremel. So just kind of be aware of that. And you're only placing the JB Weld on the sides, going over the axle of the lever, and then on the rear part of the aluminum sheet. You're not doing anything to glue the middle square section onto the rail lever. It should just be free floating. And for those curious about the weight differences, you can see here the original versus the modified with no rail covers, and then the full assembly with the rail covers. And this obviously does not take into account for how much weight you're shaving by cutting the barrel down. So that's it for my end. Everyone here is free to use these files in any way you wish. I just wanted these to be made. I have my own. I'm happy now. So if you want to get one made, you now know the steps to do it. And yeah, thanks for watching.